So I've wanted to move my main desktop over to Linux for years now, and most of my attempts, especially early on, were mostly failed because I just didn't really know that much about Linux. Now that I do know more about Linux, and I actually know kinda how to configure things, and just look stuff up on Google, however, my main problem recently has been that my main graphics card is a GTX 1060. Now the problem with that is that Nvidia and Linux go about as well together as oil and water. Just getting the two to work together is really a problem, and it's Nvidia's fault. It's always Nvidia's fault. Like, they make good products, they make good Windows drivers, but as a company, they're terrible, and their Linux drivers are also terrible. I've had nothing, just nothing but problems with it. So if you want to switch to Linux, you really have to go with AMD or Intel. I mean, if you have Intel integrated graphics, or if Intel ever releases their dedicated graphics, hopefully they'll be good for Linux. But really the solution is to go with AMD. So my AMD card that I have is a RX 480. And of course this is a very good GPU. I mean, it's a real classic. I think people are really going to look back at this card and think, man, that was a really good budget graphics card. And I certainly love this graphics card. I mean, back when it came out in 2016, man, I really wanted one of these. I didn't get it until I think like 2, maybe 3 years after it came out, but I've had this card for a while now, and there's a reason I'm not using it. And you're looking at the reason right now. This stock cooler is just so bad. It's just so bad. Now, I love the way the card looks. You know, it reminds me of like an R9 390 and an R9 Fury. It looks really good. It's really minimalistic, and it looks great. I think it looks absolutely fantastic, and that's the main reason why I wanted the stock cooler. What I didn't really look into that much was how bad the cooler is at being a cooler. Now, of course, I had heard people say, oh, it's not the greatest, but yeah, sure, it's not the greatest. It's not the greatest in the sense that it's awful. Now, AMD, in an attempt to make this card more affordable, made the stock cooler out of a chunk of aluminum that is about this big. I'm not kidding, that it's about that big, has a little tiny copper slug in the bottom, and like just that's it. It is awful. This is a 150 watt TDP card, and they tried to cool it with basically a Pentium 4 heatsink. There are Pentium 4 heatsinks that are better than this. And to really put the icing on the cake for this one, XFX, these engineers at XFX thought it would be okay to make an overclocked version. An overclocked version with the reference heatsink. There are basically two ways to get performance out of the stock heatsink. The first one is to absolutely crank the fan speed all the way up until it sounds like a hairdryer, which at that point it will finally allow the card to boost up to its proper speed. The other thing is you can do a bunch of time tweaking and undervolting the card, lowering the clock speed, dialing it in just perfectly until you get a somewhat okay experience. The first one is not really viable unless you were mining Bitcoin and you don't care about the noise, which I don't think this card's even profitable anymore, so I doubt that many people are doing it. And the second way of tuning it down is that, well, you lose performance. And it still is not going to run all that cool. It's still probably going to get up to around 80-ish degrees or so. Not really the best solution. And especially since this card has the overclocked BIOS on it, it actually puts it in pretty close territory to an RX 580, because they're exactly the same card. Just that the RX 480 has a bit more clock speed on its side. This one is supposed to boost to 1320 megahertz, so it's really close to like a stock 580. It's just that it can never realistically hit it because the cooler is so bad. There was a brief period of time where I borrowed a Arctic Accelero Extreme 3, I think it's called. Massive cooler, like a triple fan, massive cooler on a card that only goes up to here, because the rest of this is just the fan. On this really short card, you had this massive cooler, like it probably was about this long with the cooler. And this poor thing was so heavy, I had to support it in my case with a Wii U gamepad stylus. That's not a joke. If I can find the picture of it, I will show it. But that's the lengths I was going to try and get this thing cooled. And eventually I managed to get the 1060, and I just gave him back the cooler and just put this thing into retirement for, that was about a year ago probably now. And I have tried to look for other Arctic coolers. There was the Arctic Accelero Mono Plus, I think. That was the cooler I really wanted for this thing. Unfortunately, unlike, I think most of the Arctic GPU coolers at this point, I don't think they make any of them anymore. And they're just out of stock everywhere. You can't find them on Amazon, on Newegg. You can't even find them on eBay. They're just gone. They're off the face of the earth. Because I guess people are just holding on to them because they don't really go bad. As long as they fit your card, they're fine. So we need a different solution. So I was kind of looking around for different solutions, and I started thinking, well, would I be able to pull a cooler off of a different AMD card? Now, trying to find a cooler for an RX 480 or a 580 or something was not very successful. Even trying to find like broken aftermarket cards just for the coolers was probably going to be too expensive. But what if we went back a little bit to a card that has the same mounting holes as the 480? So I started hunting around for broken R9 270s. And I managed to pick up this off of eBay, this Sapphire R9 270 for like $25, which is about the same price for the cooler as I would have spent on that Arctic Mono Plus anyway. So I'm fine with doing that. And it's a bigger heatsink, so it should, in theory, perform a little bit better. So this card is broken. It was sold as broken, and I can confirm that it is super broken. I probably will not be able to focus the camera on it, but there are many things broken off of the card. There's like stuff here that's gone. There's some capacitors or resistors or whatever up there that are just gone. This card, it's probably never coming back. She's gone. So at this point, we're just going to recycle it. Instead of this ending up in the trash, we're going to recycle it, and we're going to take its cooler, which conveniently has the same mounting holes as the RX 480, and we are going to take off this horrendous cooler, give it a little transplant, and the card will even be a little bit smaller. Look at that. Isn't that lovely? Now, the first thing we got to do is tear down the cards, just to double check that everything is gonna, you know, fit. Because we don't want to get too far into the swap and my my plans for this heatsink if they're not actually going to fit. Now, they should, and I've spent a long time looking at it, and I don't see a reason why they shouldn't fit, but I guess we'll see if my estimation was wrong. I think it's only the 4 screws that hold it on. Yeah, huh, alright. So here's the R9 270. I mean, it's kind of sad that it's dead. I wouldn't do this to a working 270 probably, but this thing was dead. It was probably destined for, you know, the trash can anyways, so we'll give it a new life. Who knows, maybe you could even salvage stuff off the board if I was really in a pinch and I needed to. So this card effectively is useless for the time being. What we care about is the heatsink. Now, this heatsink also has spots on it, as you can see here, for RAM cooling, which is very convenient. Now, I don't think we'll see when we open up the 480, but the RAM placement on the 270 is a little different. I think the RAM placement on the 480 is 3 up here, 3 here, 1 here, and 1 here. So we'll have to come up with something else for these spots. But I have a little heat sink so we can try sticking on if need be. I will say though, the nice thing is that this 480 at least had a back plate. So XFX at least tried to make it a little bit more premium, but like, why didn't they just put an aftermarket heatsink on it? I don't understand that. So here is our 480. As you can see, I did replace the thermal pads on it at one point. So you'll notice that the cooler is modified a little bit. That's because I cut out the VRM section for when I had that Arctic cooler. So I just cut it out of the stock cooler because it's much easier than trying to fit all those little tiny individual heat sinks on the VRM. So that was just a fast and easy solution, and I think it worked out pretty good. So we'll leave that on here. It shouldn't interfere with the 270 cooler at all. But I don't feel like taking apart the rest of the cooler. But you can see this heatsink, like, it doesn't even have that great of fin density. Like, it really is not a good cooler. Like, it really does suck, and it's pretty it's pretty shameful that AMD thought that this was okay. You know, it's barely passable. Like, it takes the heat away from the GPU, but just barely. Like, this thing really is atrocious. So never ever buy a RX 480 with a stock cooler, or worse, buy a 470 with a stock cooler, because the 470 doesn't even have the copper in it. So yeah, that's just bad. Like, I know the 470 is a little bit, you know, not as power hungry as of a card, but still, like, that's just pathetic. So before we even get crazy here and clean off thermal paste, we just gotta see what the situation is like. I'm gonna do this off camera because well, I kind of need to see it more than you do. So okay, so there are a couple fitment problems, but I did expect to run into potentially a couple problems. So the first one is that this little extension here that's supposed to go to a memory module is hitting this capacitor up here. So we'll need to trim this back, probably just honestly cut most of it away, which is unfortunately going to leave this chip uncooled, but we can try to attach a little heatsink there. And of course this module will also need its own heatsink, but I do have heat sinks prepared for this, so that's not too much of a problem. So everything else seems to be fine, other than the VRM heatsink. I did have to take this off, and we're gonna have to trim it back a little bit. You see there's a little bit of overhang on each side. That is hitting the plastic parts here. And I could trim the plastic parts off of the actual plastic shroud itself, but that's probably going to end up looking worse, and when I could just very quickly use a Dremel and make a very clean, or even a hacksaw, honestly, make a very clean cut on the metal. So I'm going to go make those modifications now, and we'll see. Hopefully I won't ruin anything, because I kind of want this to work. Okay, so after like 30 minutes of trial and error fitment, we've made some gentle modifications. We've cut the VRM heatsink, these edge bits off, which don't actually contact the VRMs at all, so it's fine. We're losing a little bit of thermal mass, but other than that, not a big deal. And of course I needed to do that to have these plastic wings or whatever here, I guess, clear. And then here, this is where most of the trial and error came in. We had to cut off this tab here, and then I had to maneuver this kind of around in a stair-step pattern to avoid this capacitor here, and to also make sure it doesn't short against the 6-pin power connector. But other than that, the fitment seems to be absolutely perfect. So I think this is going to work out just nicely. So you may have noticed that the new cooler is not exactly in the best shape. It's pretty dirty, so obviously we got to clean that, but it's pretty scratched up and it's got some weird marks and stuff on it. So I had a very interesting idea. What if we spray painted it to make it, you know, look a little bit better? So I kind of thought about some paint schemes. You know, I thought about doing just like all white or something, but that'd be a little bit boring. And then I had the idea of, well, what if I made it like another AMD card? Say, for example, the Vega 64 or Radeon 7. I really like that silver with red accents look that those cards have, so I had the idea of getting some silver and, of course, red spray paint. And I'm going to see if I can spray paint the card and hopefully do a really good job. So I'm going to properly like sand this all down. I'm going to prime it. Going to make sure, give proper time for everything to cure, do all the coats correctly. I'm going to really try to do my best on this. So my idea for the colors is to have the main black part of the body here to be silver, and then these things that are currently silver, including this little bit here at the edge, these two little glossy things here at the top and bottom, those, and these little fake kind of exhaust things at the back here, I want those to also be red. Now, I don't know how feasible it's going to be to do, especially those, but the rest should be fairly doable. So I'm thinking nice silver with some red accents look is going to look fantastic, assuming I pull it off correctly. Now, obviously, I'm not going to paint the fans because it's usually not a good idea, but I'm going to see if I can maybe just peel the stickers off because they're in pretty bad shape anyways, and see if maybe I can just paint like the hubs silver or maybe red, but I'll probably go with silver just to see if help it make it look just a little bit better. And I think if just painting the hubs shouldn't make it too unbalanced. I'm thinking this thing is going to look really good when we're done. So I'm probably not going to show too much of me doing all the prep and actual painting process, because that's going to take a long time. It's going to be like over a week probably to actually let everything properly cure and everything. So, well, the card is done. I went ahead and put it all back together just to test it out, and I did a lot of it off camera, so sorry to disappoint people who wanted to see that, I guess. But yeah, that's what the paint job looks like, and from a distance, I don't think it looks too bad. You get up close, and there's definitely some imperfections that don't look super great, but for my first attempt at something this complex, especially on plastic with spray paint, I don't think it was a half bad job. It's kind of got that silver and red kind of Vega 64 Radeon 7 kind of scheme. I was originally going to have the Sapphire logo be red, but that ended up being too difficult, so I just ended up leaving it black. But overall, not too bad. You can see some imperfections there. If you look close, there's some paint chipped off and some weird bubbled up stuff. But, not looking at the details too closely, it's really not a bad attempt. And of course, while aesthetics are nice, I mean, after all, I thought the original cooler looked really nice. What really matters is the performance, and it's way better than this horrible thing. So I had to tweak the fan curve just a little bit because the stock one that's in the BIOS is just really bad. Like, it's really bad for the blower cooler, and it's really bad for this. I don't know what XFX was thinking, but it's just not enough fan. Because it was getting well up into like 80 plus degrees and only running the fans at like 30%. And of course then it's throttling down a bunch because it's starting to overheat, and I'm losing all of the boost clock. Like it was throttling below the stock 480's boost clock, which this is an overclocked card. You don't want that to be happening. That's the whole point of having an overclocked card, is to have it overclocked. So yeah, the original cooler was terrible. I mean, part of the problem with the original cooler was that at stock, it just did not spin the fan fast enough. But when you did tweak the fan curve on this thing, it was pretty loud, and it made the performance better, but it was still a little bit underwhelming, where this is a lot better. So now that I have the new cooler and a better fan curve set, I was actually able to crank the power limit like way up, just for the heck of it. The fans spin at about 75%, and it sits around 81 degrees when it's like fully maxed out, like really maxed out, which of course that's not going to really happen all the time in the real world, but it's nice that it stays pretty cool, and 75% fan speed is very noticeable, but it's a lot less intrusive than than this thing, and I would say it's pretty tolerable, at least by my standards. And with the power limit cranked all the way up, it pretty much never drops below 1300 megahertz. So we are getting better performance almost always than a stock 480 now, which is really, really nice to have. And just in case you guys wanted to see it, here's the Firestrike and TimeSpy scores, which is, I mean, it's basically a 480, so the scores aren't going to be, like, super impressive, but they're pretty good, and certainly a lot better than what the original cooler was capable of doing. And as you can see, I did end up painting the fan hubs. This is actually only one coat of paint, because it ended up coming out, like, really nice just on the first coat, so I figured it didn't need any more. And fans aren't unbalanced at all. Obviously, you never really want to paint the blades of a fan, because that can really start to off-balance stuff, and it'll make it pretty noisy, and it'll eventually, you know, wear down the bearings a lot faster. But this, if you just want to paint the hubs, you're probably okay. Just make sure you mask off the blades really well, like I did. And there's a little overspray on the blades, but they're not too noticeable. And since the memory arrangement is different on the 480 compared to the R9 270, I did have to put in this little heatsink here, just with some thermal tape on top of this RAM chip, and this one up here was very difficult to get to, mostly because of this plate here. I didn't cut back enough, and I didn't really want to cut out like a massive chunk of it, because then I would be losing cooling for other memory chips that are in there. So what I did is I took a smaller heatsink, and instead of being a square, it's more like a rectangle. It's kind of like half the size of the one down here. So I ended up putting it on a little copper shim that you can see, and I kind of had to slide it in under this like metal plate to get it to fit. And to make things even more frustrating while I was trying to do this, this heat pipe was getting in the way, so I had to break off this little fin on the side here just to get it to fit. But thankfully it does fit now. I'm not really sure what the temps are on the RAM. I looked in Afterburner, and I guess Afterburner doesn't know memory temps or whatever, and the Radeon software didn't seem to know either, so I don't know if the card just doesn't have sensors for that, or I forgot to look in like HW Monitor or whatever, but I'm sure the RAM's cooling is, you know, fine. So if you have a 480 that has the stock heatsink, and you really regret your decision to get the stock heatsink, and you haven't really been able to find one of those Arctic coolers, like I said, I've been looking for a while, and I just could not find one at all. And not all of them are even compatible fully with the 480, again, because of like the memory layout and stuff like that, which you have to take into consideration. But if you can find like an R9 270 that's just totally dead, and you can get a really good price on it, you know, like 25 bucks or less, to just salvage the cooler, I think it's totally worth it. There may also be other cards that have the same mounting holes as the 480 and the 270. I believe the 7870 has the same holes, because the R9 270 is basically just a rebranded 7870, so of course they would have the same holes. The problem with that is that the 7870 coolers are usually a lot bigger, and which means you might have a lot of overhang this way, which means it's going to be kind of an issue putting it in a case. But there's probably other cards you can find that have compatible you know, spacing on the mounting holes. So I would say look around, explore, do some measurements, just ask people what cards you can maybe get to fit on here. And honestly, this kind of goes for any card that you're not happy with the stock cooler for, that, you know, if you can find something that'll fit and you're willing to do some modification, often the results are pretty good. So definitely gets a thumbs up from me. I'm really happy with how this turned out. Oh, and a little side note. So the 270 that the cooler originally came from, well, here it is. Now, you probably aren't going to believe it, but I gave this to Goo, and he actually managed to get it working again. Yeah, like, with the really bad, like, stuff that was knocked off and stuff, he salvaged components off of, like, an Nvidia Quadro 600 or something, and he managed to get it working again. I honestly never expected this thing to actually work again, but yeah, it actually works. So that's pretty cool. I have another graphics card that works. I just got to you know, I have to get a cooler now that'll work. I mean, guess I could put this on it, but no, I'm not going to. The only thing is that he wasn't able to fix the little capacitors or whatever down here on the PCI Express lanes, so the card only detects as an 8X card, which is kind of to be expected. I mean, I wasn't really expecting that to be salvageable, but even if it's only an 8X card, I mean, it's still nice just having a card that I bought literally only for the cooler, so it's kind of a nice bonus. So yeah, hopefully you didn't find this video too boring. It was just kind of a project I've been wanting to do for a while, and I'm definitely going to try this out in Linux. Hopefully I'll be able to start moving more over to Linux as time goes on, and this will be a big help in that instead of using Nvidia cards, which I had been before. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.